Alrighty, so I'll go ahead and kick things off for us today. We have our Organizational Leadership Roundtable discussion with our very distinguished guest, General Rochelle. And the purpose of this call is to have a conversation about how organizational leaders should react, excuse me, during this time of uncertainty and what to prioritize in terms of their human capital strategy. And with that, I'd first like to introduce some of the other members of the Bullseye team we have on the call today. So we have Adil and Raquel. Adil's our chairman and CEO. Raquel is VP Client Services and Success. I don't know if you guys would like to give a brief little introduction maybe and give us some background about who you are. We can start with Raquel.
Hi, good morning, Raquel Furra. Very happy to be here and part of this roundtable with the team and General Rochelle, and looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kayleen. I am so looking forward to this hour with General. General has been gracious enough to be our trusted advisor for the past couple of years, and as way back, I have heard an ad from E.F. Hutton that when E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. So when General talks, I pay a lot of attention, and we should all listen. There's so much wisdom that comes from General's advice and his talks. So General, thank you very much for giving us this time.
Thank you and your team for inviting me, Adil. It's always a pleasure.
All right, and then I'm Kayleen, Manager of Customer Communications and Marketing, and I will be facilitating the discussion today. So now I'd like to introduce our guest, General Rochelle, who specializes in human capital consulting and executive coaching. He is co-founder, president, and CEO of MDR Strategies, an executive coaching, leadership development, and management consulting firm. He served over 30 years in the military and held various leadership roles, but is probably best known for his role as Chief Human Resources Officer for the U.S. Army, where he was responsible for all HR policy and management for the 1.1 million person Army. So definitely an honor to have him here with us today, and I'm sure he will provide plenty of valuable insights. And as Adil mentioned, among various other responsibilities, he's also a member of Bullseye's advisory board. So with that, we can move into our first discussion question. And so, of course, leaders in all industries right now have a lot on their plate with navigating this crisis, and we'd like to get your thoughts on what you say should be a priority for leaders as they navigate this uncertainty.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction, Kayleen, and thank you for the work you're doing on behalf of Bullseye. You've made a difference from the moment you joined the team. That's a fantastic question, and I'm a big proponent of leaders asking more beautiful questions. That turn of a phrase comes from a wonderful book by a gentleman I read maybe 2 or 3 years ago, A More Beautiful Question, and several others that I've read on the subject of how leaders best lead, especially strategic leaders. And I'm really a firm believer that leaders should be capable of placing questions on the table that elevate everyone's thinking on a given subject. The minute a leader thinks that he or she is the sole proprietor of all the knowledge and wisdom in the world, is the moment that they cease to really be leading, at least in an effective way. However, being able to, and it's interesting because I was with a coaching client yesterday for an hour and a half on this very subject. They really must be able to ask questions that elevate everyone's perspective on not only the problem being confronted, but what are the best ways in which the corporation, the best ways in which the board, the best ways in which the team should address those problems. because uncertainty is just that. And in fact, the Defense Department, I think, coined the phrase for vague, uncertain, what's the other one? Ambiguous. VUCA is the little shorthand for it. Complex is the C. Vague, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous circumstances. And the ability to go into those requires questions, not necessarily answers.
Mm-hmm. I like that perspective. So as leaders are creating these questions or deciding what should be asked, how important is it that they have real-time data?
Well, data informs the question, should inform the question, but not pure data. And this is where I'll come back to something we mentioned in the short before we did the introductions. Real-time data is critical, but that real-time data shouldn't necessarily provide an answer. That real-time data should inform the question. Mm-hmm. That helps to lift everyone's appreciation for what the data is telling us. Let me give you a personal example of this, and not one I'm particularly proud of, because it reflected one of my leadership challenges back when I was commanding Army recruiting nationwide. The Army has long had a talented group of young men and women they called ORSAs, Operations Research Systems Analysts. And they are the masters of data, the masters of data. And I dare say no one had a better stable, and I use that word very respectfully because I admire these people, I literally loved these people. No one had a better stable of bright, talented, many of them PhDs, ORSAs, than did or does U.S. Army Recruiting Command. And I literally cherished these young people because I could give them any challenge in terms of analyzing data that was flowing into the command, the headquarters from all around the country and organizations and elements outside the country, where we were engaged in recruiting back in those days, 80 to 83,000 young men and women for the U.S. Army every year. Oh. 80,000, which I used to be proud of saying when the Army recruited that many folks, 80,000 people a year is bigger than the United States Marine Corps. And it became very, very challenging after Afghanistan and Iraq. My ORSAs were coming to me saying, boss, we're headed into a perfect storm. And I would sit and look at the data and analyze the data and then ask questions. Again, data should inform the question, not necessarily provide the answer. And I was weighing both the empirical data and what I knew about the quality of the leadership I had around the country, around the nation. And I was coming down on the side of the ability of my leadership to be able to overcome the trends that the data was informing us of, until it was too late. Until it was too late. Yes, the leadership was good, but the leadership was unable to overcome the flow of the data. And I still admire those young people for both their courage as well as their expertise. I hope that answers your question. Real-time data is critical. Mm-hmm.
Yes, it definitely does.
But leadership should use the data to inform the question.
General, I mean, it's a very comprehensive, very comprehensive answer to Kelleen's questions. But this Inc. article that we talked about earlier this morning talks about a 2-sentence or 2-point agenda for the new norms talks about outcomes, that leadership should be focusing on outcomes and they should trust their employees. I would like to have you just add probably a comment or two to know what kind of outcomes should be getting attention of the leadership, and what sort of decisions on a timely basis can be made to avoid the situation that way back we learned that if the captain of the Titanic ship knew the rock was there, he could have maneuvered the other way.
I think that's two fantastic questions. The Inc. article highlights Siemens Corporation of Germany, and their two-sentence. What did they call it? Focus going forward. I'll call it a focus going forward beyond the coronavirus, and literally declaring that going forward, regardless of the situation with COVID, they would be working, and their workforce would be working 2 or 3 days each week, wherever they felt comfortable working. The thing I like best about that article was the discussion, although it was very brief, of the trust element. The trust element that was reflected in the Siemens decision that they could do that with a focus on outcomes, as opposed to a focus on how much time one spent in an office environment. Again, pardon the phrase, but with a butt in a seat. And it points to an aspect of the organization's both culture, which they were able to leverage, but it also speaks to their trust. And trust in my world, both as a coach and as a one-on-one coach with executives and a team coach, it speaks to the ability for an organization to have psychological safety. If things are going off track, anyone, a little bit like the Kaizen approach, or maybe the TQM approach, where anyone along the factory line who sees a problem can stop the line. This is more in your world than in mine, Adil, but
absolutely, Dr. Deming and Torah Production Systems.
Yes. But what we see in Siemens is leveraging their organizational culture that they obviously have built over time to their advantage, leveraging it to their advantage, but also the trust that they are able to instill in their workforce, and the psychological safety without which that trust wouldn't be possible. Two things that I think are really, really important. To your Titanic, captain of the Titanic question, I like the way a former Secretary of Defense used to speak about the things we don't know. There are things we don't know that we know we don't know. And then there are things we don't know that we don't know we don't know. And his phrase for that was unknown unknowns. And those are always out there. Those are always out there. And colleagues that I've had the privilege and battle buddies, if you will, that I've had the privilege of working alongside, many of them were very comfortable in this position of unknown unknowns. And why were they comfortable? They were comfortable because they were always sitting in the question. What is it that we don't know that we don't know? And then inviting that from their teams and their subordinate leaders. That's how you stay receptive to and open to the unknown unknown.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
So
Kelly?
on a related note, talking about culture, there have been a lot of companies recently saying that they think their culture has gotten stronger during this crisis. Some saying they believe it's what enabled them to continue being successful and resilient through the pandemic. But then you sometimes see the other end of the spectrum where you get organizations who are sort of struggling to work remotely because of the culture they had established previously, which maybe was like what we were talking about, which is heavily valuing FaceTime over actually accomplishing and the outcomes. So I just like to get your thoughts on the importance of organizational culture and maybe its role in employee development and creating a positive employee experience.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Kayleen. I think organizational culture is hugely important in employee development and in organizational growth. If you think about it from the perspective of shareholder value, if you think about it from the perspective of stakeholder value, it is, and I've had the privilege of serving on boards where the board has a keen and rather unique perspective and responsibility, obligation, frankly, to examine and test organizational, stress test, if you will, organizational culture, so that it can see beyond what the data shows. So this is very much in line with my comment about data, and timely data is very important, but it should inform the question, not necessarily be the answer. And in this case, data, which Bullseye is the master of, provides tons and tons of data to organizations. I had the privilege of accompanying a deal and members of his team. In fact, Rochelle was one of those members of the team. She was the briefer, as I recall. I won't name the organization, but a very largest association. And as we were going through the presentation, I made it a point, and the deal will remember this because he and I spoke about it subsequently. I made it a point to highlight that this particular tool, Bullseye tool, a Bullseye engagement tool, could actually make, in this case, HR, the HR arm of the organization, the preeminent arm of the organization capable of speaking to the organization's culture. And it plays a huge role in both retention, culture does. It also plays a huge role in talent development, which is a subset of retention and clearly supports retention. By the way, let me mention one other cultural thing that beyond the organizational culture, but this is kind of my perspective on the post-COVID-19, I won't say reality because we're already beginning to see some of it. But absent a very well thought out engagement strategy by organizations, those organizations who don't have one will lose talent. They will bleed talent, critical talent, at the end of the pandemic. And why is that? This is another conversation I was having with a coaching client just several days ago, talking about how that particular organization, that leader might think about his engagement strategy now so that he doesn't lose his critical talent post-COVID. And the circumstance, and this is a rather general circumstance that I think many leaders will confront. When we have the ability to field a vaccine that opens up the pipeline, if you will, for talent to flow to wherever the highest personal reward or highest financial reward may be granted, those organizations that have failed to really appreciate the importance of engagement in this current environment will be on the losing end of the spectrum, because their talent, and their critical talent in many cases, will flee to a better organizational culture and where there is better engagement. Back to Adil's comment at the very outset of millennials and their expectation of recognition and instant gratification. And it's not unique to millennials again. And many of us, it's simply been rubbed out, erased, the expectation. I hope that answers your question. A bit of a long answer, Kayleen.
It definitely does. I want to talk about that point you made about employee engagement strategy and how it's important to start on that now, because I've been seeing a lot of research talking about how right now employees are scared. They're not going to leave their jobs right now. The job market is very limited. And so you can't bank on the employees you have now to stay with you once that job market starts opening up, or that pipeline, like you mentioned earlier. And so one thing that I come across frequently as I'm talking to our clients, working with HR leaders, is how they struggle to show the business value of the strategies. So what would you suggest to someone who believes in the importance of what we just discussed? So the real-time data, or starting an employee engagement initiative, how can they show the value of these strategies?
Well, human capital strategy, that's a wonderful question. And this is something that Adil and I have had a handful of conversations about over the couple of years. I think it's important for human capital leaders, HR leaders, frankly, every leader, not just human capital leaders. But I really think it's important for them to see the bigger picture and then bring their expertise to the table as an equal partner to help leadership, writ large leadership, solve the bigger problem. So let me give you an example of what I mean. Human capital strategy that isn't necessarily linked to an overall corporate strategy is a nuisance and will be perceived as a nuisance. But human capital strategy that is nested in the unique business model and the unique organizational strategy of the bigger entity, the larger entity, the enterprise, if you will be valued for what it brings to the table. And this is a little bit in line with my general perspective that I think human capital leaders in many cases overemphasize the technique. They overemphasize the expert knowledge. They overemphasize the proprietary tools that they have access to and other members of the corporation do not have access to the detriment of their being perceived and valued as full members of the corporate strategy team. Not all. But I think it's a prevalent shortcoming. Yeah, I'll phrase it that way. Mm-hmm. There are some absolute giants out there who recognize that their human capital expertise is worthless if they can't make it fit within the overall strategy for the corporation. And those are the winners. Those are the people who have a full seat at the table. They're able to think. They're able to take the tools that an organization, the wonderful tools that an organization like Bullseye gives them or can provide for them. And then they ask the question, so what? So what? And the so what takes them to the corporate strategy level and then cascades down into ways in which that expert knowledge, that expert insight can support the corporate strategy. I had the privilege for 6 years of serving on the board of governors for the Center for Creative Leadership. It's one of the most prestigious human talent development organizations in the world. And I remain pretty close to them. In fact, I was in communication by email with the CEO just last week. Early this week. And one of the things that I think CCL does so very well, and they have a fabulous HR business partner, by the way, senior HR business partner, just a fabulous gentleman, truly talented, is that they see themselves as a full corporate member around the executive leadership team, but they recognize that their expertise is only relevant when it is completely nested in the strategy for the corporation.
Agree with you, General. Absolutely.
Thank you, Adil.
I want to go back to a couple of questions that you answered and ask you kind of a follow-up, General Rochelle. What would be, in your recommendation, what would be a key data point that you would recommend an HR leader to be looking at during this time?
Oh, during this time.
Yep, during this time.
I think I'll go back to engagement. And I'll even use the Center for Creative Leadership as a model of what I perceive to be an excellent way of doing this. My term on the board, my tenure on the board expired June a year ago this past June. So I'm not current on this, but I recall very well how much value the leadership, the executive leadership team placed in its I think it was annual. They did a broad annual, they did a deep dive engagement survey of their employees and associates across the world, around the world. My suspicion is, and I would not be at all surprised to hear that this would be true. My suspicion is that the small doses of that employee engagement that they did between their annual engagements has been expanded a bit. That would be precisely the characteristic and the culture, I might add, of the Center for Creative Leadership. And so to answer your question, Raquel, the data point, and it wouldn't so much be a data point as a question. How well are we assessing employee attitudes, perspectives, needs, and satisfaction, especially during this COVID-19 period, which falls right into what Bullseye Engagement's main offering is. It's engagement. It has to be. Everything from how likely are you to, I don't want to devise an employee engagement instrument here on this roundtable, but just a couple of examples. How, on a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 5, how satisfied are you with your first line level of leadership? Every place I've ever been my entire professional life, that first line level of leadership is the most critical level and determinant in retention and employee satisfaction. In the Army, that would be a squad or a platoon leader. And the effectiveness of that squad or platoon leader to care for, to grow, to challenge, and to teach, coach, and mentor his or her subordinates is a critical factor in whether that person at the end of the food chain will stay on the team.
Absolutely.
And I would add one other thing if there's time to do so, and that is that I don't think there's ever been a more important time for leaders to sample those engagement waters frequently. And then once again, back to the point I made earlier, let the data speak to them, but let the data inform their questions.
Absolutely. Thank you. I completely agree with you. I have one more question that I wanted to ask from the dialogue that was taking place regarding the Inc. article that came out. And as you know, we see, things are shifting from seat time to more focusing more on the outcome. What recommendation or advice would you provide to a leader on shifting their perspective, from seeing an employee in a seat time to focusing more on an outcome? What recommendation would you give them to shift how they've done things in the past?
That's a wonderful question, Raquel, and it goes right back to, I think, the very first question that Kayleen posed to me, and it's asking more questions. It truly is. It's asking more questions. I don't want to get too preachy on this, but it's important for leaders to recognize that, and research shows this over and over and over again, that some of the most novel ideas of ways to tackle problems come from the fringes. And those fringes are often the people who are heard by the leader, him or her leader, the least. There are lots of people whispering in the leader's ear about this, that, or the other, but those are typically the people who have the greatest amount of access. And what the leader has to be capable of doing is getting out to the fringes and then asking questions. What's a better way to do this? And if there's psychological safety, if the culture is one that encourages and cultivates that type of feedback to the leader, as opposed to punishing someone who gives an answer that is distasteful to a mid-level manager, which is a reflection of culture, by the way, and not an infrequent culture to be found in any organization. If the culture is such that is rewarded, recognized, that leader will get tons of valuable insight.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question, Raquel.
Absolutely.
Good question, and as usual, an excellent answer. But I would wait until Kayleen asks the next question. I'll come back and share a 30-second story, General, with you.
Okay.
So, Kayleen, go ahead.
All right. So, final question here. As we're moving through this unprecedented situation, and we see the size and the structure of organizations scaling up and down, people taking on new roles, does workforce planning add value to an organization?
It certainly does, but it certainly does, but it's a tool, like many other things. It should help inform the questions that HR professionals ask. Workforce planning. It should also inform the way in which HR professionals present their workforce strategy to senior leadership. And it should also inform the way senior leadership challenges HR's recommendations for workforce planning. But if you see workforce planning as in its larger context, as I tend to see it, it is a tool by which leaders can reinforce the culture, the organizational culture they want, if they view it as an organizational culture tool, as opposed to simply a workforce planning and workforce management tool, which can be rather blunt sometimes if you take my meaning. It can be a fairly blunt tool. But if you look at workforce planning as something that can reinforce the organizational culture that a leader wants, then it's a very useful tool. Very, very useful.
As always, we have gotten so many good answers, and I believe after every hour I spend with General, I leave room or the conversation feeling that I'm a little bit more informed. I've gained a little bit of an altitude. As always. So thank you very much. Going back to Raquel's question and General's answer about the leaders and Siemens, this article that how should leaders react and to the new norms, as actually the very first time I heard the new norms was from you, General. As COVID was, we were right in the middle of it, and we're still unfortunately right in the middle of it. General told, said, Teal, I think this will create new norms. And everybody is talking about it. But when I was learning, and this is going back to Dr. Deming, and it's going back to the Toyota production system, and before they trained engineers who went to Japan to learn this wonderful systems of and to learn waste elimination and employees being empowered to stop on the assembly line. They can stop the entire assembly line. They would take the group to an elementary school first, and just for the start of the school. And people want, truly wonder, why am I going to an elementary school? And they see these kids come in, assembly, go to their classrooms, teacher comes in, everybody stands up and says something, of course in Japanese, and people ask us, what just happened? And the bus taking back to them to the plant for training said, what students said to the teacher, please teach us, we are ready to learn. So the willingness to learn, in my opinion, General, is the key for the leadership to get the data, look at the questions, ask the questions, but then have that willingness to change. Because this word, as changing it is, it's still changeless in many aspects, but of course change is happening, and we have to be ready to adapt. We have to be ready to accommodate and change ourselves and mold ourselves into the new norms and be ready to tackle the new challenges.
Indeed. And if I may comment, Adil, I really applaud your leadership and that and your team, including the wonderful team you have on this roundtable with you, because what you're doing is creating, in many ways, creating what engagement really looks like in the new norm. And it is shifting. It's shifting dramatically, in my opinion. And yes, I began to think through what the enduring impacts of this social isolation, the enduring impacts of many millions of people working from home as opposed to working in traditional settings, and how much of that would be residual long after COVID has passed. And that Siemens article that I uncovered on LinkedIn just this morning and decided to share with you earlier today is an example of what we're talking about. And I dare say that what what you are positioning Bullseye as in this new normal is a thought leader on just what that what that new norm for engagement, what that new norm for maybe even HR practices writ large, or human capital practices writ large, what those are. And so it's, and I know I'll sound like a broken record when I say this, but to the extent that Bullseye continues to ask the questions, to ask the more beautiful question, as the wonderful book, and I'm trying to remember the name of the author, and maybe it'll come to me before we're done. Warren Berger, that's his name, just like the Chief Justice. A More Beautiful Question by Warren Berger. Just like that book that I read 3 or 4 years ago speaks to, it's all about putting that question out there that elevates everyone's perspective on the challenge. The answers will come, but the questions are infinitely more important than the answers, because the wrong answer to the right question, well, let me rephrase that. The right answer to the wrong question is useless.
So true. So
Agreed.
True. Absolutely, absolutely. You know, we at Bullseye, I find myself blessed, truly blessed, by surrounded. You know, I'm truly surrounded by one of the best advisory board anybody can put together. So that's the only credit I can take. The rest is
you deserve far more credit than that.
Is just learning from all of you and learning from our customers on a daily basis. And we're blessed with a great team. Everyone is taking care of their business, and they are absolutely trusted to do so, and they are delivering. We have been working from home, Rochelle, for how long now?
Since mid-March.
And we have not missed a heartbeat. None of our team members have, and so very proud of them.
Very impressive.
And this morning has been a total delight for me, and I'll let Kayleen and Rochelle speak for themselves, please.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. All of your insights I know will be very valuable, not only to us and our team, but to all of our listeners. So thank you again.
Thank you for your leadership on this roundtable, Kayleen. You did a beautiful job.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Again, always just a pleasure and a delight to hear from you and see you on Zoom. And so really extremely valuable insight for organizations, leaders, HR, etc. Thank you.
Thank you, Raquel. Pleasure
Please,
to be with you.
stay well and safe. Best wishes always to you and Grace. And
thank you.
Hopefully we'll see you in person.
Hopefully soon. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Kelly, thank you.
Thank you.
Be well, everyone.
Take care.
Be well.